right, I think we can get started. Hi, everyone. We're so excited to kick off our first webinar for this year's Accelerating Impact Challenge. Today, we're joined by Helen Goldberg, a member of the Resolution Advisory Board and a longtime Resolution volunteer. Helen is currently the Director of Programs and Operations at Coleman Family Ventures. Today, she's going to discuss impact evaluation and what funders are looking for in your pitch. As a reminder, we are recording this session, so you can take notes of any questions that come up, and please feel free to drop things in the chat and come off mute when prompted. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Helen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. This is really exciting to be a part of, and congratulations to all of you on the progress to date on your ventures and on your scaling journeys, which I imagine you're in the middle of and are ahead of you. I will start by saying I'm not an expert in impact evaluation, but I've had the opportunity through several roles, including my current one, to understand the sorts of questions that funders are likely to ask you, or that they're just going to want you to be prepared to answer when it comes to thinking about impact evaluation. And when I say impact evaluation, I'm talking about everything from how you define the impact that you're intending to have, how that flows through into your work and your programs, and then how you're measuring and talking about it in the back end, and then the way that that's influencing what you do going forward. We've got some slides, some of which I'll kind of present, some of which we'll talk about together. But what I was hoping to start with, and we can probably just sort of skip ahead, Somali, all the way to number 3. When I say impact evaluation, and maybe just put this in the chat, what do you think of? What comes to mind for everybody? Yep, theory of change, numbers and users, data collection, M&E, monitoring and evaluation. The result, the product or service you're providing. Yep. Being able to know how people were reached by your programs, like that. Results, evaluating your objectives. I agree with all of this, and I'll point out that there's a lot of variety in what you all shared. And I think part of what that captures is impact evaluation is kind of a large umbrella. It includes a lot of things. And there are parts that, I'll encourage you to lean in on first, and parts that you'll build over time, and parts that as the founder and leader of your organization, you'll get to decide how important they are to you. And what I mean to say is this isn't a formula, and you don't need to sort of fit into a box, but there are some things that, are probably universally important, and some things that you'll figure out whether are important given what you're trying to accomplish. How you quantify KPI results, yeah. So maybe, Somali, could you go to the next slide? Yeah, this one. So when I think of impact evaluation, I'm thinking usually of a few things. Generally, for me, impact evaluation is a kind of set of processes. Like I said, it encompasses a number of things. It's a portfolio of things. And these processes are all things that help you understand what changes can be attributed to a particular project or program. And you do impact evaluation for a number of reasons. One is straight up trying to determine the return on investment of an intervention. Was it worth it to do? Did you get the results that you wanted or the results you intended with the inputs, including the costs, the expenses that you put in? What is infinitely more important is the other 3 things. And that's sort of what you do with the information, or how you understand the information. Are you using it to inform your future strategies and priorities? Is the data something that you look at and then make decisions about in terms of how you operate in the future, or is it something that just sits there? And that goes into learning and adapting. How are you changing and understanding what your work is likely to accomplish, or what types of activities will lead to what types of results, and influencing your behaviors in the future. And then reporting and sharing results. And I think when we think about reporting, and this will be the focus of this conversation, we often think about funders. That is a really important audience. It is definitely not your only audience. And I think one of the things that I'll encourage you all to think about as founders is, who are your audiences? In many cases, your audiences are going to include your leadership teams, with whom you'll be sort of making sense of data together and making decisions based on data together. Your broader staffs or volunteers, if you have those, so they're sort of aware of what's going on. Your participants, when they see a particular impact, when they see that you have influenced 100 lives, what does that mean for them? Is that something that they think is great, and in fact, exactly what they had hoped for? Were they surprised it was so many and would rather it were fewer and deeper? How are you kind of including them in the conversation? How might your data influence policy decisions? Are there people in policy positions who need to understand that investments in a particular type of program are likely to yield a particular type of result, or that the policies they're making contribute to or hurt the enabling environment for the impact that you're trying to have? So reporting and sharing results broadly to the audiences that are most important for your work and the context of your work, and thinking about what are the messages or types of information among the results that you're collecting are important for each. We'll do one more and then I'll stop talking for a minute and we can sort of process what we're talking about and what makes sense. So I opened by saying there are some pieces that I'd encourage everyone to sort of universally do. And I think Somali may have shared, or Michelle might have shared this list of questions with you all in advance. I have heard this referred to as your impact model, but I think what it really is every social entrepreneur needs to be able to communicate, and clearly and succinctly is really important here, the answers to these questions for themselves, for their staffs, and critically for external audiences, including funders. You may not answer all of these questions in every pitch. You may not do them in this order. That's not really important. What's important is that you are able to answer them, that you understand the purpose of your organization, what it's trying to achieve, how you measure that, and what your performance is on them. Okay, I think I'm gonna leave that there. And I'm gonna pause for a minute and see what reactions do people have so far? What questions? How does this all sort of sit with your experience of impact evaluation to date?
If I could go.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's great to frame it around a broader set of processes, but also constituents that you're reporting to. Because at least for me, until now, most of the time, impact evaluation is for some form of funders. And it's sort of about what's the return on investment. When in reality, there's several steps before the return of investment that need to be evaluated before you can sort of get there, which is something I've struggled with because I know those steps, but sometimes I feel like what's expected of me is just to sort of jump to the direct financial value and return on investment, when sort of like there's some intricate steps in between that help inform sort of the adjustments and learning in the process.
I think you're making two really good points. And I think the first one is on ROI and thinking about your different constituents, your different audiences. Engaging your different audiences in impact evaluation can actually change the ROI. And what I mean by that is like the example with sharing your results with community members. If community members feel more ownership and more bought in, or participants feel more ownership and more bought in your program, you could actually end up seeing a greater return. Or you may have a lower investment required because they may do your marketing for you, right? If your audience is policymakers, sharing results out with them about the ways in which a particular policy is helping or hurting the enabling environment for your program could increase the return, could increase the results of your program. So I think that's sort of one piece, that reporting isn't just sort of what happened, telling people what happened, right? It can also influence what happens in the future. The second part, Wandile, is this is also your opportunity to educate your audiences about the intermediate steps and complexity of what it is you're trying to do. Now, the challenge is you are responsible for making it, despite its complexity, clear enough that everyone can follow along with you. You know, that the storytelling aspect of it falls on your heads, and that is a challenge when what you are doing is not simple. But the more you get them to be bought in and understand the complexity of what you're doing, and not just expecting that you snap your fingers and get results, the better off you are. And also the more kind of understanding they're going to have of the types of investments you need from them in order to achieve the results that they want. I see a hand raised. Please go ahead.
Yeah, well, first of all, I would like to thank you. I think one of the challenges that we're facing right now, at least where we are developing or implementing our venture in Venezuela, is that we started as a community kitchen, and then that evolved to a community center, and then we added an educational component. So having access to, so we have students that go to a primary school that is nearby the community center, and some of them receive the educational support from us, and some of them don't. So having access to that data of the academic performance from those students that don't is quite hard, because it doesn't allow us to see how better off are the students that receive an educational support from us. And then also, I think it's hard to measure the indirect impact that you may be having in the community. So having to design instruments, because there's a lot of impact, both negative and positive, that you might be doing in the community, but you don't know how to measure it, because you know exactly how to do so. So I think that's one of the challenges that we're facing, because yeah, we're helping children, but we're not able to determine precisely how much impact that's having in their life and in the households that we're supporting.
Yeah, Samuel, I think you point out a number of things that are challenging about impact evaluation. One of which is it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be complete, particularly if what you're doing is something holistic, which it sounds like you're doing. There's a food aspect, there's an education aspect. It sounds like there's a community engagement and socialization aspect. It's really hard to figure out what is the right metric or set of metrics to measure when what you're doing is really holistically providing opportunity for a whole bunch of people. Oftentimes, the best and only way to get at that is what people, in this case, it may be the children or it may be their family members, say, is their life better, right? Like that may be the only sort of meta way that you can capture overall. When your sort of hard data sources are owned by someone else, it sounds like in this case, maybe the schools own the academic data. There are ways in which organizations get that, you know, they have data sharing agreements. Those can be really, really expensive and high investment for your organizations to work on and to get. And so you're going to have to decide if it's worth it, basically. In most cases, I would encourage you to start small and then expand. So when I say start small, I say, what are the couple of metrics, 3, that are most important for you to measure and that you can also control yourselves? And so that may be the counts of who's participating. It may be survey results from participants about the ways that they're experiencing things. And there may be sort of one hard number that you can get at that is observable to you. And then I would build over time. There's a risk in a world in which impact evaluation eats up all your time for your programs, right? It's supposed to be in service of the impact you're delivering. It's not supposed to take it over. And Mary, thank you for the clarifying question about tailoring. No, I do not think you should tailor your impact evaluation to your audience. I think you should tailor the story you're communicating to your different audiences. So one set of data that you're collecting, you as the founders know what the priority items are, whether that's Again, it probably is something, and we'll get into this in a minute, something about scale and reach, something about results at a minimum. And then how you tell that story is going to look different based on what you know the audience cares most about. Samuel, if you're talking to an audience who only cares about educational metrics, then that's what you're going to talk about, right? You know, it sort of makes sense, but that doesn't mean that the other half of your program isn't important. Alicia, I saw your hand up.
Yes, Helen, thank you so much for those insights. Well, my question is around, do you think we might want to focus our impact evaluation on what we project on the future, like in the future, if given investment, or you think we should focus on the impact that we have already created? Because I'm thinking in line with the project that we are doing, which is focusing on enhancing economic mobility. But just like Wandile had mentioned, that has a process which might include creating awareness of that particular business opportunity and training, and probably along the way you're focusing on awareness and training, and you have not yet tackled the adaptability part that could probably literally increase their economic mobility. So do you think during my pitch presentation, I should be focusing on if women increase this adaptability of the business, they would be able to increase their incomes by ABCD, or we should literally just focus on we have been able to train this number of people, and these ones have been able to get aware of maggot farming vis-a-vis that time of entry. What do you, I just want to understand your take on that. And also, do you think return on investment is applicable for a nonprofit organization, and how does it like unveil that to our fund? Thank you.
Yeah, so great question. I think the answer to your first question is both. You certainly want to talk about the results that you've accomplished to date, because it builds your credibility. It says, I am out there, I am doing these things, which is how I have the expertise to be telling you this story here today. And it's why you should trust me to do this more. You should also tell them about your desired impact. And I think if you look at the list of questions here, we've got desired impact is number 3, and impact to date is the last one. You also want to have your desired impact and some understanding of what it's going to take to get there. What's the gap between where you're at right now and where you want to be? Because that is where that funder would come in. So you'd want to say to them, today I am, increasing the, job skills, economic mobility skills of XYZ number of women through doing ABC activities. With additional investment of this amount and this type of technology, which I could get if I had this other thing, I don't know what exactly the things are, then I would be able to increase their income by this much. And you could see how, and that's what we're trying to do over the next 3 years with your support. So I think you want to be able to encapsulate all of that if possible. ROI, so return on investment. I don't mean it in the literal corporate sense. I don't actually mean a sort of, you put $5 in and you get 10 lives out. It's that oversimplifies it. I think what you want to be saying is you want to be making the case that this is a good use of resources in terms of the results that it will yield, so that you are working efficiently, so that you are so that you're yielding results. And so that story may look, it may look financial depending on what your impact, your model is. It may look like with an investment of $100, we can train 20 women, and we know that that training leads to ABC result. Or it may look like a sort of more complex story, but you somehow want to be able to tie your inputs and activities and programs to the result. And that's what I mean by ROI. I see 2 more hands raised, Sagar and Samuel, so we'll do those, and then we'll jump on to our next few things, and we'll have lots more time to talk over the hour too.
Thanks, Helen. Thanks for all the insights and being so patient with all of us. My question to you is, while I do understand like a lot of the context you've already provided, what I do want to understand is in terms of impact evaluators or say the funders, is there a good versus bad metric when it comes to measuring impact? When I say bad, I don't necessarily mean it in the literal sense. What I mean is, are there metrics that don't help in measuring impact as much as opposed to a few other metrics which show impact in a much more in a better way, so to say. So I just wanted to understand if from their end, are there metrics that they're looking for when it comes to evaluating ventures, and are there a few metrics that they always sort of look out for when it comes to these ventures? And I know there aren't universal metrics. There is a lot of context and nuance attached to every organization, but I'd still want to get, say, a generalized take on this if you have one, for that matter.
So we're going to get a little bit later in the conversation to what are funders looking for, but I'll preview it by saying two things. One is, I think the idea of there being a specific set of metrics that you have to stick to is a little bit of the sort of older school version of philanthropy. I think that, thankfully that's changing. And so I've thought two thoughts on that. One is, one of the ways in which you will demonstrate your leadership and that, again, you are a good investment is by coming in with clarity about metrics that you measure and making the case for why those are the right ones. Again, you're there as you are the expert, you are running the venture. And so you will be educating your audiences about why they're the right things. But, all of the stakeholders you're talking to or are groups that you're looking to partner with or are partnering with in some way, so they likely have something to add as well. It's okay to say, here are the 3 things that we're measuring today. Here's the reasons why and why that's important and what that tells us. Are there other priority metrics that you look for? Why are those the ones that you look for? I think that can be a great way to start a conversation. This is also one of those sort of classic things in the world of philanthropic funding, where if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money, which is like not always true. But I think bringing them in on the discussion and being part of solving the sort of problem with you can be a great way to sort of bring them on your team.
Oh, that's pretty helpful. Thanks, Ellen, for that.
Samuel?
Yes, more of the question sharing experience is that, for example, one of the mistakes that we did at the beginning was that we never took a baseline measurement. And I think it's important that when we're talking about impact evaluations, that we're able to take a baseline, knowing where we're starting, so then we're able to actually sell the proper impact that we're having on our projects, and then knowing exactly which instruments we're going to use, both quantitative and qualitative, to make sure that we're obtaining objective data, that we're not contaminating our data, and that we're not, having effects of placebo effect or Hawthorne effect or attrition. It's also going to help, and that we're not manipulating our own data unknowingly, because that happens as well. Like, I've seen a lot of projects where they don't do the baseline mechanism, and then when they're halfway through it, they just find the instrument that it's better for them to showcase their narrative more than actually measure the impact. So I think those are 2 things that we also need to bear in mind when we're talking about impact evaluation.
Yeah, I think we're going to get to that in 2 slides, so stay with me. I think there's a balance, right? Of course, you want quality data collection and sort of the ethical analysis about what you have actually contributed to and what is attributable to your program. Absolutely. On the other hand, remember, like, this isn't a clinical drug trial. These are things that are happening in the real world with the complexity of the real world. I mean, an example that comes to mind is working with an organization that had a randomized control trial data behind it that showed that it was impactful, that a Ivy League university had done the study and had this big package, and then COVID hit. And so they had to change all of their model from being an in-person one to online. And there was a big question in the industry about, is it still going to yield results? Should we support it? It's not able to deliver its thing in the same way that the data said. So you don't want to be too rigid. You want to show, where possible, the results that you're having, but you also want to show some flexibility to be able to operate as reality changes. Smalley, could we go to the next slide? We'll do the next couple because I think we're starting to get into the more kind of data pieces. So earlier on, when I asked what you all think about when you think about impact evaluations, and people said theory of change, These are terms that I'm sure many of you have heard before. These are the definitions that I use, and I think there's some, some wishy definitions that people may use a little bit differently, but I found these to be helpful. And these are the components of what would go into a theory of change, or how you might use these terms in communicating your results. So a couple of pieces. The first is activities. This is what your program does. That this may be training sessions. It might be giving away products or food. It might be advocating. It might be building things. But this is the actual actions that you and your organization, your program are taking. Outputs are the scale and reach of your activities. So this is when I think someone earlier said when they think about impact evaluation, they think about the number of people who are involved or the number of participants. That's outputs, and we do usually measure this. It's one of the ways to demonstrate efficiency and scale, and so that's important. They're really more about a barometer of effort, or a barometer of how much investment has been made, right? You put more money and time in, you can serve more people. So they're really important, but they're not kind of the end all and be all of impact. Outcomes are when we start to get into results. So this is where we see things like increased knowledge, increased income, changes in behavior. So if your activities are a training program, your outputs are 20 people change, the outcomes may be that 5 of them reported that they had better knowledge of the thing that you trained them on. And these are usually relatively direct. You're able to attribute these results to your specific program. Impacts are what is likely to be the hardest for you to measure and will be the longest tail to manifest. They take time because these are the broader, larger scale changes that the particular beneficiaries you serve, or maybe even their broader communities, experience as a result of your program. And so the examples I gave here, let's say that you had a public health intervention. Maybe it's focused on better hand washing, just to keep a simple one. So your activities are, you've got your better hand washing campaign, and your outputs are that 100 school children participated in activities related to your better hand washing campaign. And as an outcome, to half of them are washing their hands much better, but they also are going home and talking to their families about it. And at school, they're telling their teachers about it. So maybe what you're seeing is that the rates of transmission of XYZ disease have actually fallen in the region. It's probably not just based on you. It's probably not just impacting the particular children who are in your campaign. It may take years to happen. It may be hard for you to fully measure, but you can point to the ways in which you're part of that larger movement and narrative. And that's the kind of big picture that you're probably trying to get to with your venture generally. And we'll just talk about the next one, and then we can talk about these two together, the data pieces. Sorry, the one other thing I should say about theory of change. If you Google theory of change, you will find a bunch of flow charts and tables that you can use as templates. But generally what a theory of change is an if-then statement that uses kind of these terms. A theory of change says, if I have this investment to do these activities, then the results will be these outputs, outcomes, and impact. So it's almost like a hypothesis. And when you're communicating a theory of change, what you want to be able to do is communicate that succinctly. If I do these things with this investment, then I will yield these results. If my venture does it, then they'll get this result. And then you need to sort of bolster that with the credibility. What's your evidence for that? Is it because it's based on research? Is it because you did a pilot and it showed those results? Is it because it's been done elsewhere and you've adapted it locally? What are the, are you at the pilot stage and you're testing a bunch of different if-then statements? So those are the sorts of things that you want to be able to talk about when it comes to theory of change. Smiley, could you go to the next slide, please? Samuel, I think this is what you were getting at a little bit in terms of data quality. measurement and data. So there are a lot of different ways to show change. Comparing to the baseline, which you mentioned, is a really clear one. You may also compare period over period, so year over year. Maybe you didn't get the baseline, but you can still compare year 2 to year 3. You can compare to a control group. So, if you're doing your hand washing campaign in this community, but a community 10 miles down the road has not gotten it, how does it look different? Another kind of principle, and I mentioned this earlier, is I encourage you to start by measuring what you can and expand over time. So, the question again about, the school owns the academic data. Start by measuring what the students themselves say is their experience of school. Maybe you ask them to self-report their grades from school. Maybe you do your own assessment of their reading levels once they've participated in your program, and you say, based on your own staff's assessment, they're improving in XYZ that way. And then 5 years down the road, if it's appropriate, you work on getting that data sharing agreement with the schools and kind of include that in there. The third kind of principle here on measurement and data is you got to make sure you're using the data. It can be really easy to collect data because it feels like rigor and then have it sit there. So it's really important to be thinking about what the data is telling you about who benefits from your work, and then how you can use that data to change what you're doing, and increase actions that are effective and make changes if something's not fully delivering results. It's okay to tell your stakeholders, including funders, that you collected a bunch of data and showed that one particular program wasn't living up to standards, and so you've pivoted in this particular way. You don't want to just sort of say it's not working, but being able to say it's not working, and so here's what we're doing differently is it's a strong show of leadership, which is what they're going to be looking for in you as founders. I also want to point out this particular sort of question of what the data is telling you about who benefits. One of the things that you may want to look at in your data is breaking down by different audiences. So, for example, Alicia, I know you mentioned serving women. If your program had served men and women, did you want to look at what are the impacts for men versus women? And is one group yielding better results versus the other? What does that tell you about your program? It's important for equities to sort of understand who your program is serving well and not well, or if it's serving everyone sort of equally. And the last is a point we sort of made from the top about including participants and community in impact evaluation, understanding what questions they have and what results they most value. What do the results mean to them? And how does their participation sort of impact what you do? So I'll pause there between the sort of point on theory of change and metrics and data and measurement. How does this sit with you all?
I think it's good. Thank you.
Well, I have a quick question.
Sure.
So my question was, let's say you start the organization and you're solving for one particular type of problem, and you realize that this is really a systems level problem, which then leads to your organization having to create a number of interventions or initiatives or programs to try and ensure that the core problem is being addressed. How do you then look at the theory of change, especially as it pertains to the activities? Because now you're doing activities, for example, across 4 different programs, and your outputs are not always going to be the same across those 4 different programs, because again, it's a system level issue. So now you might, let's say, talking about education, you now have to touch educators, ministry officials, private sector players, learners themselves, and all of this is being cut across 4 different programs, right? So how do you then think about what the theory of change should look like? How often should you even review it, considering this system it's got so many problems, right, that you have to somehow also address through different programs or partnerships? I
Yeah,
hope
so
that question was clear.
Yeah, so one thing I'm gonna do after this, I was just looking at my phone to see if I could find it quickly, but I can't. I'm gonna dig up some examples from other organizations that have either holistic programs where they do, or programs or organizations with lots of different programs, and how they show their theory of change and those pieces working together. It's not unusual.
Mm.
So I think some examples on that will help. Two, a systems level problem. I mean, most problems we're solving are complex, right? And so I think there's a few different ways to go. One is, what is the piece of it that you are addressing? And how are you complementing others out there who are addressing other pieces? It may, just because the problem is complex doesn't mean you need to solve it all, the whole thing. I'll put that there. But then that's a strategic question that you will answer. Let's assume that you've answered it, and the answer is you are going to solve the whole thing. You're going to have to figure out the way to tell, if you're convinced of that, and by say convinced that one, it's a complex problem that has multiple components. Two, you are the right player to address all of those components, and three, you're able to do that. Then you have to figure out how to tell that story to others so that they believe you, right? It is a storytelling challenge at that point as much as anything else. Yeah, I'm not sure. Does that sort of get? I know it's not a clean answer, but does that get at what you're asking, Taku?
Yeah, yeah, it does. Because well, at least this is because I'm speaking from my organization, which, because they were these gaps in the system and no one was addressing them, that didn't allow us to get as far as we want to get to in solving the core problem, which then led to us really then saying, okay, we should now start, educating teachers, because if the teachers actually don't know what needs to happen in the classroom and they spend all this time with these students, then the outcomes we expect from the students won't happen.
Yep.
And now we've gotten to the stage where we have a number of sort of programs. And the question is, so what's your theory of change? And we're like, well, originally it was this, but now we have to solve all of this. And yeah, so then it gets to, well, how useful is the theory of change, or is, I guess, like you're saying, is there a way that other organizations do it? Because we started actually creating a theory of change per program, but then now that's like so much going on, right? And maybe sometimes some of these funders just want one simple, concise, crisp statement that encapsulates everything, but it's difficult to do it that way.
So yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I'm going to be real with you. It's just difficult. I think you should be able to tell some version of your story in 3 sentences, which I know is hard. And I'll try to think up also some examples of, I think if then is one way. I've also heard the sort of recipe structure. And by that, I mean, what we're trying to bake here is a cake of all the kids in the community have what they need to graduate from high school. And we know that the components of that are great facilities, strong curriculum, engaged parents, and trained teachers. We've got great facilities already, which is fantastic, but the other 3 are completely missing from our community. So we're running a series of programs that target each of those strategically through training, advocacy, and whatever, investment. And together, what we're seeing is 50% more kids are on track to graduate. So that glosses over what's a whole lot of complexity underneath it. And if you've got the right audience, they're going to ask a follow-up question. They're going to say, oh, that teacher training thing is really interesting. Tell me more about how you do that. And then you dig underneath it. But what you want to do with that high level is make it interesting, compelling, impactful, believable enough that they then ask the next detailed question. So you got to get a balance between specificity and high level there.
Okay, got it. I'm actually going through the journey right now. So maybe once we've shaped something, I could send it to you and get your thoughts.
I'm happy to.
All right, thanks.
Did I see another hand up?
I was going to chime in about the recipe piece you explained so wonderfully. But I had heard of the peanut butter sandwich kind of example of like explaining the process of like enjoying a peanut butter, and it was exactly what you were saying, that recipe part, which I think helps clarify like the end goal is usually ideally the same, and if your different activities are not leading to that end goal, like that final impact, then perhaps that's a bit of a mission drift of an organization not necessarily aligning all of their activities towards one impact, right? So I think that also is a good kind of reminder to like filter activities based on whether it's leading you to that final impact, and if not, then perhaps not doing it as well.
I think that's a great point. One thing that thinking about your theory of change can help you do is figure out if anything you're doing is extraneous, or it's not that it's bad, but it maybe it's just a distraction from that real path that you believe in to lead to the result that you care the most about. Yeah, Wandile?
Yeah, great discussion. I think my question is in line with the previous question. For example, I'm building a Yelp for workplace inclusion to help women and people of color find workplaces where they are valued. Right now, there's no real way of knowing what the culture is like until you work there. And Glassdoor is more anecdotes than specific indicators that are researched to cause high turnover amongst these groups. Now, when you look at Yelp, for example, there's ratings, and whether in New York or LA or a new city, you will check Yelp to see what's a good place and something that's rated well, and you go there, right? But how does Yelp prove that I made the decision because I looked at the comparison within their platform? So that's hard to measure, but really at the core of it all, that's the value proposition. That's okay. How do you think about some of that impact that's more perceived than I can actually prove?
So I don't know anything about Yelp specifically, but I'm going to make some guesses here, and I think it'll get us at a few things. One is you use proxy metrics. So maybe number of downloads is a proxy, because if people see value in Yelp, they're going to download it. Or maybe it's retention on the platform, or a number of uses or time on the page, right? Another is, what is the end result for the restaurants? So are you seeing, can you demonstrate that restaurants that are higher rated on Yelp have higher revenue, or see an increase in revenue as ratings go up, or vice versa, right? And then there's net promoter score. So, or, asking users, in a survey of the value that they see in it. So there are many different ways you can get at it. But those are some of the kind of common ones that I've seen used. But I think you also make a good point about proxies and benchmarks as you're trying to think about, and Mary, I think you're asking for what is a simplified metric or formula for reach. Reach is another way of saying the number of participants. So how many people are you serving? And so that's usually a count. You're usually counting the number of people that you're serving. I think looking at other organizations that you admire, that you see as peers, that you see as benchmarks, that you see as similar, and looking at what they're measuring is a good place to start when you're trying to figure out what are the things to measure. Not that you wholesale copy it, but you say, I like this thing that they're doing, I don't like this other thing, so I'll take, I'll kind of port over this piece and change this other one. I just want to get through the last few pieces kind of quickly, and then we'll do any more questions. So Molly, would you mind jumping? So we'll talk now a little bit more about what funders are looking for, and what I'm seeing and hoping to continue seeing is a move towards a more trust-based model of philanthropy, where it is important to be measuring impact and to be communicating your results, but data for data's sake is no longer a thing. So what you probably are used to hearing is more of the old school model. And this is evaluation as a tool for proving something, proving that you are worthy of existing and your program is worthy of existing, and for accountability. But where the field is heading and has been for the past few years, and this is all good news, is that evaluation is a tool for learning, and which is, it really should really say learning and improving. Probably should have written that part, but and what that looks like is, in the past, it was more data for data's sake. Today, prioritizing data that's the most useful is what a funder is going to want to hear about. They want to hear, one, that you've taken the leadership and you have your hands around the work enough to know that these are the 3 things that we really need to measure. And 2, they want to know that you're spending your time doing the program and that you're measuring to improve it, but that measurement isn't taking over everything you're doing, which, you know, having reams and reams and reams of data can do. In the old school version, you had these long-term expensive data collection processes happening to prove that a program works. Oftentimes they'd happen after the program ended in a sort of post-evaluation in a very kind of scientific model. The problem with that is it's expensive. It takes a long time. You may be losing people along the way if there are things that you could have been changing. And it happens after, right? The model and where the field is now is it's more about ongoing data collection and analysis to do sort of constant improvements as you go. Sure, we want to do the sort of demonstration that what we're doing is having impact, but we also want to make sure that if there are things that we can tweak along the way, even if, Samuel, to your point, it's a little screwy against your baseline, if you can, I'll take a screwy baseline if you can have more impact, right? And I think this is where some of the questions about, you know, is this appropriate in a nonprofit? That's what you want to be sort of thinking about as your North Star is what can I do that will be most impactful for the people I'm serving. And then the third one, and I think this gets to Sagar, your question about, you know, are there good metrics? And I think the old models funders would dictate the metrics to report on. Some funders still will, particularly government funders. But we're moving more into a world in which the organization itself, the venture itself, is setting the desired outcomes, ideally with community member input, which sort of reinforces its own clarity about purpose and priorities. We'll come back to this in a minute, but can you actually skip to the next slide, Somali? I'll just share that and then we'll jump back to this. I'm going to make some massive overgeneralizations here on this slide, just so you know, but broadly speaking, in my experience, if we think about funders in a few different categories, here are some of the things that I see each of those categories is commonly most interested in. On the government side, tends to be more compliance oriented and accountability oriented, which maybe isn't surprising given that it's taxpayer dollars. They're going to want to see things like your outputs, so your scale, your reach, the number of people you're serving. Sometimes the funding will even be sort of per head, per child served. They're going to want to see very specific alignment between the program that they bought, almost in a contractual sense, and the results that are yielded. And they'll want to see deliverables that look almost like a contract. So they'll want to see, again, if you said you were going to tutor 10 kids, they want to see tutoring for 10 kids, even if you think that tutoring for 8 kids will really revolutionize their lives and allow you to focus more, you know, get even better results for those 8. If you said 10, they want 10. Corporate funders are interested often in the sort of scale. They want to see the big numbers. They want to be able to report out to their executives and to, you know, often in their employees that they help 10,000 children. Now, if your choice is helping 1,000 children deeply and 10,000 children in a lesser way, most of the time they're going to want the 10,000. Again, broad generalization, but big corporation, big numbers, think that. And then collateral. They'll often want, they're going to want photos, they're going to want videos, they're going to want stories, they're going to want quotes. So if and when you work with a corporate funder, think about your capacity to provide those things. And if you don't have that capacity, how are you building into a grant funding that they are going to provide for you to hire a photographer for a day or gather that? So just, you know, ask the question, what collateral are you looking for and expecting here? Institutional funders, and by this I mean foundations with big staffs. So these are things like Gates Foundation and Rockefeller Foundation and Ford Foundation, where the people you're dealing with are often program officers who kind of do this professionally. They often want to see contributions towards some longer term organizational strategy. They probably have very specific theories of change that they believe in, and they're interested in you because your theory of change kind of nestles in that. maybe they more broadly, one DLA want to know about, they have a broad theory about how to make all workplaces more inclusive, and ratings is one piece of that. And policy change is another, and whatever. And then they also care about learning. So they want to gather sort of information and learning about what is working in the field, what isn't, and that's coming from them. And then families and foundations, I would say it's the learning aspect is definitely a piece of that as well. And then often personal relationships. So how are you thinking about how you are building, connecting with your sort of counterpart there to build that relationship. So let's jump back, maybe Somali one. I think it's slide 10 that we skipped over. And one, I'm happy to sort of like broadly go wherever you all want to go in this, but the one I skipped over, oh yeah, 11, is what do you wish funders understood about your work and impact? If you want to think about that and put that in the chat, feel free. P, that impact is a balance between depth of services and number of people served. Yep. I think that's a great point. I think that's where having some combination of scale and reach numbers, those outputs and the outcomes, the depth of impact will often serve you well. And you're going to have to keep making the case for it, I think. Behavioral changes and soft skills outcomes are fundamentally different from traditional educational outcomes. Ooh, yeah. So does that mean you have to measure them differently? I mean, I think I see that, I hear you, I believe you. And then I think there's a so what that comes after that you have to communicate to audiences. So therefore, here's what we're doing differently. Here's what you're going to hear from me differently. But there's scale to be had in depth as well as quantity. Yeah. I think that kind of harkens to Api's point too. That despite the humanitarian emergency in Venezuela, there's still initiatives that are providing support to communities and having an impact. Yeah, I think, this idea of a place where something is difficult, so should we rush in or rush away, is a narrative that you're gonna, I think, unfortunately, come up against a lot, and making the case that there is, whatever your venture is in whatever context in which you're operating, making the case that there's both a need, but also an opportunity, or like things are bad or could be bad, but we can respond to that, is going to be part of the most important case making that you'll do. More than showing data, is getting people to believe there's a need and that something can be done about it. Is probably your most important communications goal. Organizational change takes time, and it's accelerated by empowering employees versus fearing companies' perceived reputation, and that we're still looking for ways to be self-sustaining. And I mean, I will say, and now, I don't know what your venture is, but not all ventures should be self-sustaining, right? Like some things are things that philanthropy or government or community, that we need to support each other. And that, I think that is another, if there's revenue to be generated from your venture, awesome. If if there's some revenue, but it needs to be subsidized, awesome, make that case. If you can be fully self-sustaining in 5 years, awesome, make that case. If you always need philanthropy and government because the people you serve do not have the resources to provide them otherwise, make the case, because there is a return there is a return. It just may not be financial, right? So I think communicating that and making sure that people understand that is going to be really important. I wish they realized that their mindsets are not the same as the mindsets of our team, let alone our beneficiaries. Yep. I mean, now we're just talking about human nature, but yeah, I hope you are able to help us all understand the perspectives of who you are and who you serve. And social enterprise is limited here. Yeah. I think, there's some opportunity, I will say, in communicating about being early. You get to tell the funder that they get to be in on the ground floor on this new opportunity. I think there's something special that you can often help people feel like they are part of your team when they are part of something that is new, different, early. So I know I need to jump in just a minute or two. Thank you all. This has been really fun, and I'm so excited for all of the change and impact that your ventures will bring to our communities and our world. Somali and Michelle have my contact information. If you ever want to continue the conversation, I'm happy to. But I will pass the mic to them in case there is anything housekeeping that they've got to do.
Yes, thank you so much, Helen, for facilitating this workshop. I also want to be mindful of time. So if any of you have questions for Helen, please email us with the AIC account, and we're going to follow up with Helen and get those answers to you. But before we all log off, I want to take a screenshot so we can share with the rest of the resolution team. But please feel free to come off camera or stay with your video turned off if you're not comfortable. And I'll take the screenshot in the next 3 seconds. I just saw Wandile's comment. Yes, we need the collateral. Perfect, got it. Awesome. But thank you again. Just as a reminder, the next session is this Friday. So be on the lookout for a confirmation email and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, have a good
Thank you
one.
so
Thanks,
much.
Alan.
Thank you. See you. Bye-bye.
Have a great
Thanks,
day.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.